A food delivery girl accidentally saves a disabled boy from being bullied by his classmates. A few hours later, a millionaire suddenly appears and wants her to work for him. The rain had started as a drizzle in the early afternoon, barely noticeable against the smog-covered sky. By now, it had settled into a steady rhythm, tapping against the fogged-up windows of the pizza shop. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of melted cheese and garlic, mingling with the faint scent of overused fryer oil. The warm glow of overhead lights flickered slightly, a reminder that the shop's electrical wiring was just as old and unreliable as its peeling wallpaper. Megan stood behind the counter, shifting her weight from one foot to the other as she waited for the order to be ready. Her uniform, an old faded red polo with Tony's Pizza embroidered over the chest, had seen better days. So had she. Her reflection in the glass door showed a young woman in her mid-20s, hair pulled into a messy ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her tired face. There were faint circles under her hazel eyes, the kind that never fully faded, no matter how much sleep she managed to steal between shifts. Her sneakers, once white, were permanently stained from years of navigating wet sidewalks and greasy kitchen floors. A low voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Harper, you gonna stand there all day, or you planning to actually work?" Megan turned, already familiar with the sharp tone of Dan, her shift manager. He was built like a retired linebacker, with a permanent scowl that deepened whenever he looked at her. "I'm waiting on order 63, she replied, keeping her voice neutral. Dan snorted, wiping his hands on his apron. "You've got a face like someone just kicked your dog. Loosen up. It's just another delivery." "It's always just another delivery." Megan leaned on the counter, exhaling slowly. Dan didn't bother responding. Instead, he jerked his chin toward the kitchen, where Louise, the cook, was balancing 3 boxes on one arm while flipping the receipt with the other. "Large pepperoni, 1 veggie, and a meat lover's special. Westbrook Elementary address, so don't expect a tip," Louise said, handing them over. Megan took the boxes, the heat from the cardboard a brief comfort against her cold fingers. She wasn't expecting a tip. She rarely did. "You're taking the bus, right?" Louise asked, nodding toward the rain outside. "Walking. Bus takes too long this time of day." Dan let out a low chuckle. "Yeah, wouldn't want to waste your precious minutes not being miserable." Megan ignored him, balancing the pizzas carefully in her arms before pushing out into the damp, grey evening. The walk to Westbrook was uneventful, the city moving at its usual sluggish afternoon pace. The air smelled of damp concrete and exhaust fumes, and the occasional car horn cut through the patter of rain. By the time she reached the school's front entrance, her hair was damp at the edges, and the warmth from the pizzas barely reached her fingers through the bag. She stepped inside, shaking off the wetness as she made her way to the front office. The receptionist barely looked up. "Delivery?" Megan nodded, sliding the bag onto the counter. "Teacher's lounge. Down the hall, 3rd door on the left." The hallway smelled of disinfectant and old carpet, a sharp contrast to the rich aroma of melted cheese escaping from the pizza boxes. Megan followed the directions, passing a few bulletin boards cluttered with classroom artwork and reminders about the upcoming book fair. At the lounge, the door was half open. Inside, a group of teachers sat around a long table, laughing over half-empty glasses of wine and untouched plates of pasta salad. One of them, a woman in a burgundy cardigan, glanced up. "Oh, food's here." Megan placed the bag on the counter and unzipped it, pulling out the boxes. The warmth spread into her fingertips, a brief comfort against the lingering cold. "That'll be $32.75, she said, adjusting the strap of her bag. The woman rummaged through her purse, finally handing over 2 crisp $20 bills. "Keep the change." Megan forced a polite smile. "Thanks." She turned to leave, but something caught her eye through the large window facing the playground. Outside, near the school gate, a small group of students stood in a tight circle, their bodies hunched together, in a way that sent an immediate warning through her gut. And in the middle of them, a wheelchair. A boy sat inside it, small and hunched, his hands gripping the armrests as the older kids spun the chair in circles. Megan's grip on her bag tightened. A teacher laughed behind her, some inside joke passing between the group, but the sound was distant, muffled against the rush of blood in her ears. She glanced back at the receptionist, still scrolling through her phone, oblivious. No one was looking. Her stomach twisted. For a second, she hesitated. This wasn't her business. She had done her job. She could walk away, head back to the pizzeria, and pretend she never saw it. But then, the boy's head snapped back, his small hands reaching out as the wheelchair tipped. Just slightly. Just enough. Megan didn't think. She dropped her bag, turned on her heel, and walked straight toward the door. The sound of laughter grew sharper as she stepped into the rain, heart hammering against her ribs. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, a thin mist that clung to the air, making everything look blurred, softened at the edges. The asphalt shimmered under the dim afternoon light, puddles rippling as occasional footsteps disturbed their stillness. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared, muffled by the heavy clouds that still hung low over the city. Megan adjusted her hood, pulling it further over her damp hair, her feet steady on the pavement as she made her way toward the school gate. She wasn't thinking about much, just the lingering warmth of the pizza boxes now long delivered, the bite of cold air against her fingertips, and the simple relief of being outside again, away from the overheated teacher's lounge with its casual laughter and wine glasses. But then she heard it. Laughter. Not the bright, careless kind from earlier, but something sharper, laced with something mean. She slowed, her gaze flickering toward the sidewalk near the entrance. A small cluster of kids huddled together, backs turned inward, moving in a way that set off something in her gut. And then she saw him. A boy in a wheelchair. Small, fragile-looking, his dark hair falling into his eyes as he gripped the armrests tightly. The older kids surrounding him weren't speaking, but their laughter filled the space between them as they spun the wheelchair in lazy, cruel circles. Mark. The name came to her before she even knew how she knew it. Maybe she had heard one of them say it, or maybe it was the way the boy's expression shifted. His jaw clenched, his shoulders hunched, like someone who had been through this before, who had learned that waiting it out was easier than fighting back. Megan stopped, her grip tightening on the strap of her bag. It would be easy to walk away. This wasn't her fight. The school had teachers, staff, security. Someone else would step in, right? But no one did. Mark's fingers twitched over his lap, his legs still beneath a thin fleece blanket. The older boys, 12, maybe 13, kept at it, their voices light, careless. "Come on, Mark," one of them grinned, nudging the wheelchair. "We're just helping you move a little." "Yeah," another added, giving it another spin. "You like the rides, don't you?" Mark didn't answer. His knuckles were white. Megan took a breath, then stepped forward, her boots making a quiet splash in a shallow puddle. "That's enough." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It had a weight to it, the kind that made people listen, the kind that told you this wasn't a request. The boys turned, their amusement flickering for just a second before one of them, a lanky kid with a sweatshirt too big for his frame, rolled his eyes. "We weren't doing anything," he muttered. Megan didn't blink. She placed a steady hand on the wheelchair's backrest, grounding it, stopping its momentum. "He's not laughing," one of the other boys scoffed. "We're just messing around. He doesn't care." Mark lowered his eyes, his breath uneven, but Megan could see it, the tension in his small frame, the way his fingers curled slightly, like he wanted to disappear into himself. She turned to him, crouching slightly, meeting his eyes without the weight of pity, just quiet understanding. "Do you want them to stop?" The silence stretched for just a second too long. Mark swallowed. His voice, when it came, was small but steady. "Yes." Megan straightened. "Then you're done here." The taller boy exhaled through his nose, shifting on his feet, like he wanted to argue but couldn't quite find the words. "It's not a big deal," he said, almost to himself. "Then walk away." Another hesitation, then a shrug. "Whatever." The group started to scatter, a few muttered complaints under their breath, the air shifting as their presence faded. Megan let go of the wheelchair, but stayed close. Mark's fingers flexed slightly, still gripping the armrests, though the tension in his shoulders had eased just a fraction. "Are you okay?" she asked. Mark didn't answer immediately. He looked past her for a moment, watching as the boys disappeared down the sidewalk, before exhaling softly, his hands finally relaxing. "I'm used to it," he mumbled. Megan frowned. "You shouldn't have to be." Mark's gaze flickered up to her, cautious, like he wasn't sure if he believed that. Before she could say more, a movement near the school door caught her eye. The security guard, an older man with tired eyes, stood just inside the glass entrance, watching but unmoving. Megan's jaw tightened. She turned, stepping forward, raising a hand. "Hey," she called, "can you get a teacher out here?" The guard hesitated, then sighed, reaching for his radio. Mark shifted slightly in his chair, watching her. "You don't have to," he murmured. "Yeah, I do," she said simply. The radio crackled. "Need someone from staff at the front gate." Megan glanced back down at Mark. His eyes held something unreadable, part gratitude, part something else. For the first time, he looked like a kid. Just a kid, not someone trying to be smaller than he was. She didn't move away. Not until a door opened down the hall, and footsteps, slow, reluctant, headed toward them. The teacher's lounge was warm, the air thick with the scent of reheated pasta and cheap wine. Laughter bubbled between clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation filling the room like a soft current. The storm outside seemed like a distant thing, its steady drizzle barely audible against the backdrop of idle chatter. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, a half-full glass of red wine in one hand, her phone in the other. She was scrolling absently, pausing every so often to nod at something a colleague said, though she wasn't really listening. Her world was contained within this room. The soft glow of the overhead lights, the easy comfort of routine. Then the radio crackled. A voice cut through the room, tinny and distant, yet firm. "Need someone from staff at the front gate." Jennifer exhaled slowly, her lips pressing together in irritation. She recognized the security guard's voice, and she recognized the timing. It was near the end of the day, and the last thing she wanted was to be dragged into some minor student issue. "Seriously," she muttered, setting down her phone. "Can't he handle it?" The other teachers barely glanced up. A man across from her chuckled. "Must be Mark again." Jennifer rolled her eyes. "Of course it is." No one asked questions. No one offered to go instead. With a long-suffering sigh, Jennifer pushed back her chair and stood, still holding her glass of wine as she made her way toward the door. Outside, the drizzle had faded into a fine mist, clinging to the air like a veil. The schoolyard was nearly empty now, the occasional car pulling up to collect the last few lingering students. Mark sat in his wheelchair near the gate, his hands folded in his lap, his expression carefully blank. Megan stood beside him, her stance firm, arms crossed. The security guard hovered a few steps away, his hands shoved into his pockets, looking vaguely uncomfortable. Jennifer's heels clicked against the pavement as she approached, She took one last sip of wine before exhaling sharply and lowering the glass. What now? Mark didn't answer. His fingers twitched slightly, but he didn't meet her eyes. Megan, however, did. He was being bullied, she said, her voice even. Right outside your school. Jennifer blinked, then sighed, shifting the glass to her other hand. Again? Megan's jaw tightened. You knew this was happening? Jennifer shrugged. Mark tends to exaggerate things. Megan looked down at Mark, whose shoulders had drawn inward, his hands gripping the fabric of his jeans. His silence spoke louder than any argument could. He didn't exaggerate anything, Megan said, her voice sharp now. I saw it. Jennifer sighed again, this time slower, as if Megan were the one exhausting her. Kids will be kids, she said, waving a hand. It's how they learn to handle conflict. You can't step in every time someone gets teased. Mark's hands clenched. Megan took a slow breath, forcing herself to remain calm. That wasn't teasing, she said. They were spinning his wheelchair. He almost fell. Jennifer's expression remained carefully neutral. Did he actually fall? The question hung in the air, cold and clinical. Megan stared at her. Are you serious? Jennifer lifted one shoulder in a half shrug. Mark's been difficult since he started here. His situation makes him sensitive. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's real concern and what's... She hesitated, glancing at Mark, then back at Megan. Attention-seeking behavior. Mark flinched. It was barely noticeable, just a slight twitch of his fingers, but Megan caught it. Her stomach turned. She lowered herself to Mark's level, crouching beside him so they were eye to eye. Who do you trust? She asked, her voice gentle now. Who can I call? For the first time since Jennifer had arrived, Mark moved. His lips parted slightly, his breath uneven. His fingers curled into his sweater, and for a moment, he looked like he wasn't sure if he should say it. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, My grandpa. Jennifer sighed. That's unnecessary. He's already been... Megan stood, her movements slow, deliberate. I'll call him, she said, pulling out her phone. Jennifer blinked. Wait, but Megan was already dialing, according to the number Mark said. Mark sat very still, his hands finally relaxing as the phone rang. The line barely rang twice before the voice on the other end answered, deep and steady, despite the faint rustle of papers in the background. Russell Grant, speaking. Megan hesitated for only a second, then squared her shoulders. Mr. Grant, my name is Megan Harper. I'm calling from Westbrook Elementary. Your grandson, is he hurt? The interruption was immediate, sharp. Megan glanced down at Mark, who sat still, his small fingers clenched against his lap. No, but... Where is he? With me, at the front gate. He was being bullied and... A muffled voice in the background, something clipped and businesslike, interrupted. A woman's voice. Megan caught only fragments. The Singapore contract. And sir, the board is waiting. Russell's next words were quiet, but they cut through the noise like steel. Reschedule the meeting. Another voice protested, but he was already speaking over them. Tell them it's not up for discussion. Megan heard the scrape of a chair, the sharp intake of breath, as if he was already on the move. Ms. Harper, I'm coming now. He hung up before she could respond. Megan lowered the phone slowly. She didn't know what she had expected. Hesitation, questions, some demand for proof. But Russell Grant had wasted no time. Beside her, Mark exhaled, just a fraction of relief slipping through the tension in his shoulders. Megan placed a reassuring hand on the back of his wheelchair, a silent promise that she wasn't going anywhere. 15 minutes later, the mood at the school had shifted. The drizzle had turned into nothing more than a fine mist, clinging to the air, settling in beads on car windshields. The few remaining students waiting for their rides had gone quiet, their attention drawn to the street where a sleek black sedan had pulled up to the curb. Russell Grant didn't rush as he stepped out. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention. Tall and sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, his silver-streaked hair slicked back in practiced precision, he moved with the kind of assurance that only came from years of knowing the world bent for men like him. Teachers in the parking lot glanced at each other. The security guard straightened. Even Jennifer, who had crossed her arms in irritation just moments ago, shifted uncomfortably on her heels. Megan, standing beside Mark, took it all in. The way people unconsciously adjusted themselves, the way silence seemed to settle naturally around this man. But Russell's eyes were only on one person, Mark. The moment the boy saw him, his small frame visibly relaxed, his fingers unclenching from the fabric of his jeans. Grandpa. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried. Russell closed the distance in measured strides, his expression unreadable until he knelt before Mark, eye level, one hand resting on the wheelchair's armrest. "Are you all right?" The words were quiet, but there was weight behind them, an intensity that didn't need to be raised to be felt. Mark nodded, though not entirely convincingly. Russell's gaze flicked upward. Megan met his eyes for the first time. They were sharp, assessing, but not unkind. A man used to reading people, to knowing when he was being fed lies or half-truths. "You called me," he said simply. Megan swallowed, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Russell glanced at the security guard, then at Jennifer, who immediately straightened, her expression shifting into something close to forced politeness. "This is a misunderstanding," Jennifer started, stepping forward. "There was a minor incident, but we have everything under control." Russell didn't look at her. "Mark," he said instead, "tell me what happened." Mark hesitated, his gaze darting toward Jennifer, then toward the security guard who had done nothing. But then his fingers curled slightly against the wheelchair's armrests, and for the first time, he spoke without waiting for permission. "They were pushing me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Spinning my chair." Russell's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. A shift, a warning. Megan could see it in the way Jennifer's fingers tensed around the stem of her wine glass, in the way the security guard cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at the man in front of him. Russell exhaled slowly, then straightened, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket. His next words were directed at no one in particular, but somehow they carried enough weight that they might as well have been spoken into a microphone. "This school," he said evenly, "is supposed to be a place where children are safe. A place where those in charge uphold that safety, not ignore it." Jennifer opened her mouth, but Russell turned then, finally looking at her. His expression didn't change. He didn't raise his voice, but whatever she had been about to say died before it could leave her lips. Megan didn't look away, because she had seen powerful men before, had delivered pizzas to their offices, had overheard their meetings from across busy lobbies, had watched them talk over the heads of their assistants. But this was different. Russell Grant wasn't angry. He was deciding. Mark's hand curled around the fabric of his grandfather's sleeve, grounding himself in the presence of the only adult here who had come for him. Megan cleared her throat. Russell shifted his gaze back to her, and for the first time since he arrived, he addressed her directly. "You saw everything." Megan nodded. "Then tell me the truth." She squared her shoulders. And she did. The principal's office was dimly lit, the air stale with the faint scent of old coffee and stacks of untouched paperwork. The walls were lined with framed certificates, hollow acknowledgements of responsibility that now seemed ironic under the weight of the situation. Russell Grant stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture composed but unyielding. He had barely spoken since entering, but his presence alone had shifted the atmosphere, coiling it tight with silent authority. Across from him, Jennifer perched on the edge of a chair, one leg crossed over the other, trying too hard to appear at ease. But Megan saw the way her fingers gripped the armrest, the slight tension in her jaw as she avoided looking directly at Russell. The principal, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and nervous eyes, cleared his throat. "Mr. Grant, I want to assure you that Westbrook Elementary takes incidents like these very seriously." Russell finally turned, his gaze sharp. "Does it?" The principal hesitated, his hands folding over the desk. We believe in fostering a supportive environment for all students. Our teachers work hard to ensure that every child—" Russell cut him off with a quiet, precise question. "And what part of that supportive environment includes leaving a 6-year-old to be tormented in plain sight?" Jennifer shifted. "I wouldn't call it tormenting." Russell's gaze moved to her, and she quickly continued, her tone controlled, but laced with defensiveness. "Special needs students require patience. It's not always easy to integrate them into a normal school environment without occasional challenges. Mark, he's sensitive. Sometimes he misunderstands situations, and that can make it difficult for his peers to interact with him." Megan stiffened at the words, at the way Jennifer spoke about Mark as if he was an inconvenience, as if he was the problem instead of the students who had harassed him. Russell remained silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled through his nose, a sound of pure restraint. "That's not patience," he said finally, his voice deceptively soft. "That's neglect." Jennifer's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but she seemed to think better of it. The principal glanced at her, then at Russell, the weight of the man's words pressing into the room. He cleared his throat again, shifting uncomfortably. I understand your frustration, Mr. Grant. We will, of course, address the matter appropriately." Russell's gaze didn't waver. "What does that mean?" The principal hesitated. "Well, we'll conduct a review, speak with the students involved, implement additional training for our staff on how to handle these—" "No." The single word, firm and controlled, made the principal's mouth snap shut. Russell took a step forward, his tone unchanging. "There is no review necessary. The negligence here is obvious. The failure of leadership is obvious." He gestured toward Jennifer without even looking at her. "She should not be in charge of children." Jennifer's face reddened. "I have been a teacher for 10 years. "And in those 10 years, how many students like Mark have been left behind under your watch?" Russell asked, his voice still impossibly calm. Jennifer clenched her jaw. "That's not fair." Russell ignored her, looking back at the principal. "I expect her resignation. Today." The principal's hands twitched slightly, his glance darting to Jennifer. "Mr. Grant, if it doesn't happen," Russell continued, "I will personally ensure that this school's funding comes under review, and I will not stop until every parent, every board member, and every investor is made aware of the failures happening within these walls." The principal swallowed, the hesitation still there, but not for long. He nodded stiffly. "Understood." Jennifer let out a sharp breath, her chair scraping against the floor as she stood. "This is absurd," she snapped, looking at Megan now as if desperate to direct her anger elsewhere. This is your fault. You walked in here acting like you—" "She protected Mark," Russell interrupted. "Something you failed to do." Jennifer's mouth opened, then closed. She grabbed her bag off the desk, her hands shaking slightly. For a moment, Megan thought she might try to fight it, but in the end, Jennifer only let out a sharp exhale before turning on her heel and stalking out of the office. The silence that followed was heavy, but brief. The principal cleared his throat, still looking at Russell with the hesitant unease of a man standing too close to a storm. "I'll see to it that the necessary paperwork is handled by the end of the day." Russell nodded once, a silent dismissal. Megan watched as the principal left, leaving only the two of them in the room. The tension still hung in the air, but it had shifted, no longer taut with conflict, but with something quieter. Resolution. Russell adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, then finally looked at Megan. "You did the right thing calling me." Megan exhaled, only now realizing how tense her shoulders had been. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it for Mark." Something in Russell's gaze flickered, not surprise, not approval, but something unreadable. A pause. Then, "I owe you." Megan blinked. The words weren't said lightly. They weren't empty or performative. Russell Grant was not a man who owed people things, but he had just said it to her. Before she could respond, before she could even process the weight of what that meant, Russell was already walking toward the door. She stood frozen, speechless, as he disappeared down the hall. Megan remained in the empty office, her heartbeat steady, but her thoughts racing. She hadn't planned for any of this, and yet something told her this was only the beginning. The door to Tony's Pizza creaked as Megan pushed it open, the familiar warmth inside instantly swallowing her whole. The scent of garlic butter and baking dough clung to the air, heavy and thick, a stark contrast to the damp chill outside. For a fleeting second, she allowed herself to believe nothing had changed, that she had simply completed another delivery, that she would walk behind the counter, tie on her apron, and blend back into the rhythm of the kitchen's chaos. Then Tony's voice cut through the illusion. "Where the hell have you been?" Megan barely had time to let the door shut before he stormed out from behind the register, a grease-stained towel slung over his shoulder, his face already flushed red, not from heat, but from anger. She tightened her grip on her bag. You were gone for almost an hour." He threw his hands up, his voice rising above the chatter of the few customers lingering inside. "What part of 30-minute delivery window do you not understand?" Megan felt the exhaustion settle deep in her bones, the rain, the confrontation at the school, the weight of Mark's small voice in her mind. My grandpa. She had spent the last hour standing up for someone who needed it, and now she was here, being scolded like she was a reckless teenager. "I got held up," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Tony scoffed. "Yeah? Doing what? Saving the world?" Megan stared at him for a moment, then shook her head. "You know what? Forget it." She reached for the apron tied around her waist, tugging it loose. "I quit." Tony blinked, caught off guard for just a second before his bravado returned. "Like hell you do. I'm firing you." Megan let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Great. Saves me the trouble." She tossed the apron onto the counter and turned before he could get another word in, pushing the door open and stepping back into the cold. The rain had started up again, a light drizzle coating the pavement in a thin sheen. Megan walked without a destination, her hood pulled up, her thoughts tangled between frustration and exhaustion. The streets were quiet, just the occasional car rolling past, headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know where she was supposed to go. A job. She needed a job. But the thought of walking into another restaurant, another low-paying shift where her time wasn't her own, made her stomach twist. A sleek black car pulled up beside her. At first, she ignored it. Then, the passenger window lowered. "Miss Harper." Megan stopped, blinking against the rain as she turned her head. Russell Grant sat in the driver's seat, one hand on the wheel, his expression unreadable. His suit jacket was folded neatly beside him, his sleeves rolled up just enough to hint that he had been driving himself. Something about the sight caught her off guard. Powerful men like him didn't drive themselves, they didn't chase after anyone. And yet, here he was. She swallowed. "What are you doing here?" "I had a feeling you'd need a ride." Megan let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. "Do you just follow people around after telling them you owe them something?" "Only when I intend to repay the debt." She hesitated, rain dripping from the edge of her hood. "I don't need money." Russell didn't blink. "Good. I wasn't offering any." She frowned. "Then what are you offering?" Russell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, pristine business card. He extended it toward her through the open window. "Come work for me." Megan stared at the card. The words, Grant Industries, embossed in sharp, elegant lettering. She didn't move to take it. Russell tilted his head slightly. "You called me today because you saw a problem and refused to ignore it. That's a rare quality." Megan crossed her arms. "I don't know anything about corporate jobs." "I don't need you to." A beat of silence stretched between them, the rain pattering softly against the car. Megan looked down at the card again. It was ridiculous. Completely insane. A billionaire offering her, a pizza delivery girl, a job. And yet, she had walked away from her only source of income today, unsure of what would come next. Now, possibility sat before her, waiting. She reached forward slowly, fingers brushing against the smooth cardstock. But she didn't take it. Not yet. "I need to think about it," she admitted. Russell nodded once, unfazed. "That's fair." He placed the card on the passenger seat, within reach, but not forced upon her. "Where are you headed?" he asked. Megan exhaled, glancing down the street toward her apartment. "Home." Russell gestured to the seat beside him. "Then let me take you." Megan hesitated. She had no reason to trust him. No reason to climb into a stranger's car, let alone the car of a man who ran in circles so far above hers, they might as well have been different planets. And yet, for the first time in a long time, someone had offered. Not demanded. Not expected. Offered. She pulled open the door and slid inside. Russell put the car in gear. As they drove through the rain, Megan found herself staring at the business card in her hands. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. Cliffhanger. Megan turned the card over in her fingers, considering the impossible. Maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. Leave a comment. Cloud, if you find this story inspiring. The hum of the elevator filled the quiet space, the polished chrome doors reflecting Megan's uncertain expression. She adjusted the strap of her bag, fingers tightening slightly around the leather, her heart a steady but noticeable drum in her chest. She had called Russell 2 days after their encounter in the rain. It had taken her the full 48 hours to dial the number, pacing her tiny apartment, turning the business card over and over in her hands. The idea had seemed absurd. Accepting a job from a man like Russell Grant, stepping into a world she knew nothing about. But something about the certainty in his voice, the way he had waited without pushing, had made it feel less like a trap, and more like a door she had never considered before. And so, she had called. His assistant, a woman named Evelyn with a voice as polished as glass, had answered. Mr. Grant was expecting your call. No hesitation, no confusion, just quiet efficiency. A car had been arranged. An email with basic information had followed. And now, here she was. The elevator chimed softly as the doors slid open, revealing the 24th floor of Grant Industries. Megan stepped out onto a floor that looked like it belonged in a movie, sleek, modern, expensive. Glass walls stretched high, sunlight pouring in through massive windows that overlooked the city skyline. The air smelled faintly of citrus and something else. Power, maybe. The kind that settled into spaces where money moved like oxygen. She barely had time to take it in before the whispers started. They weren't loud. Barely more than murmurs passed between the employees as they walked past her, sleek suits and sharp heels clicking against the marble floor. That's her. The girl from the school thing. I heard she was a waitress or something. More like a charity case. Megan kept her gaze forward, refusing to let the words settle. It wasn't surprising, really. A billionaire hiring a pizza delivery girl without credentials or a polished resume wasn't exactly normal. To them, she was an anomaly, an outsider who had somehow landed in the middle of a world she had no place in. And maybe they were right. She squared her shoulders, letting out a slow breath. It didn't matter what they thought. She wasn't here for them. A woman approached, a tall blonde in a deep emerald dress that looked tailored to perfection. Evelyn, Megan guessed. The woman smiled, crisp and professional. Good eye. Welcome to Grant Industries, Miss Harper. Mr. Grant is in a meeting but asked me to show you around. Follow me. Megan did, her boots muffled against the floor as they moved through the wide hallways. The weekend visit to mark the office tour had been overwhelming. Too many glass walls, too many unreadable expressions. By the time the first week had passed, Megan felt stretched thin. That Saturday, she found herself outside Russell's estate, standing on a driveway large enough to fit an entire city block. The house, no mansion, loomed ahead. A pristine testament to wealth that made her old apartment feel like a shoebox in comparison. The front door swung open before she could second-guess herself. Megan! Mark's voice was bright as he wheeled himself forward, excitement written all over his face. You came. She exhaled, smiling, despite the tightness in her chest. Told you I would. He grinned, leading her inside. The estate was as polished as she expected. Vaulted ceilings, chandeliers, the kind of luxury that didn't even try to be subtle. But Mark's presence softened it, made it feel less intimidating. So, he asked, bouncing slightly in his seat. How's the new job? Did you get a fancy desk? Megan let out a breathless chuckle. I don't even have an office yet, just a temporary workspace. Mark nodded sagely. Do they like you? She hesitated. The whispers, the way people looked at her, the weight of eyes judging her every move. I don't know yet, she admitted. Mark tilted his head. Are you scared? Megan sighed, running a hand through her hair. A little. Mark grinned, reaching forward and grabbing her hand in his small one. You can do anything, he said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. She stared at him, at the unwavering belief in his eyes, and something in her chest loosened. Maybe he was right. The first meeting Monday came too fast. Megan found herself standing outside a sleek glass conference room, her reflection faintly visible in the polished surface. Inside, people in sharp suits spoke in low, deliberate tones, their confidence tangible. She wasn't supposed to be here. The thought was intrusive, unshakable. Then she remembered Mark's voice. You can do anything. She squared her shoulders, tightened her grip on her notebook, and pushed open the door. Cliffhanger. As she stepped inside, all eyes turned to her. This was it, her first real test, and she was ready. The conference room was cold, not physically, but in the way that sterile, polished spaces always were. Clinical, efficient, impersonal. The air smelled faintly of coffee and expensive cologne, and the floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a painting, a reminder of how high up they were. Megan stood at the threshold, gripping her notebook tighter than necessary. The room was already full. Executives and senior managers sat around the long glass table, their conversations low and controlled, exuding the easy confidence of people who had been in this room 100 times before. She had barely taken a step inside when the first glance landed on her. Then another, and another. A flicker of recognition passed between them, a silent exchange Megan had become familiar with in the past week. That's her, the charity case. The thought pressed against her like a weight, but she forced herself to move forward, taking the empty chair near the far end of the table. Russell entered moments later. The room straightened in response. No announcement, no words, just a shift in posture, in attentiveness. Megan had never seen anyone command respect with such little effort. He didn't sit. Instead, he placed a folder on the table, glancing once at Megan before addressing the room. "Let's begin." Megan had expected the first week to be difficult. She hadn't expected it to feel like walking into a battlefield unarmed. The hierarchy in the office was obvious, sharp lines drawn between who mattered and who didn't. She wasn't just new, she was an anomaly, and people didn't bother hiding their skepticism. Her assignments were small, tedious tasks. Data entry, reviewing contracts she didn't yet understand, sitting in on meetings where she wasn't expected to contribute. None of it was insulting, but it was clear no one took her presence seriously, except Russell. He didn't hand her easy work, nor did he offer encouragement. He simply treated her like she belonged, and somehow that was enough to keep her moving forward. But the more time she spent at Grant Industries, the more cracks she saw beneath the polished exterior. Long hours that weren't compensated. A toxic culture where junior employees feared speaking up. Managers who delegated their responsibilities downward, leaving assistants and interns drowning in work that wasn't theirs to do. The problem wasn't loud, it wasn't blatant, but it was there, and Megan saw it everywhere. By the time Saturday arrived, Megan felt stretched thin. She found herself outside Russell's estate again, standing on the front steps as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway. The moment the door opened, Mark wheeled himself forward, grinning. "You survived your first week." Megan let out a tired laugh. "Barely." He led her inside, rambling about a new book he had been reading as they settled into the library. A massive space with high ceilings and walls lined with shelves that smelled of old paper and ink. "So?" Mark asked, leaning forward, his chair rocking slightly. "Do you like it?" Megan exhaled. "It's different. Different good or different bad? Different overwhelming?" Mark tilted his head, thoughtful. "Because of the work?" She hesitated. "Because of the people?" He nodded like he understood. Megan ran a hand through her hair. "There's this culture. Like, people are afraid to speak up, to challenge things that don't make sense, and the ones with power, they just expect everyone else to deal with it." Mark tapped his fingers against the wheel of his chair, then smiled. "I had a friend at school who changed everything." Megan arched a brow. "Oh yeah?" Mark nodded. "This kid in my class, one of the popular ones, he saw another kid getting picked on, just ignored, nothing big. But instead of staying quiet, he called it out. And once he did, everyone else started noticing too. The whole class changed after that. Like, one voice made a difference." Megan blinked. One voice. She stared at Mark, at the unwavering certainty in his expression, and something inside her clicked into place. The problem at Grant Industries wasn't just bad management or workplace politics. It was silence. And if no one else was willing to speak, she exhaled. Maybe it was time she did. Monday arrived with the quiet intensity of a brewing storm. Megan sat in yet another meeting, watching as managers pushed their responsibilities onto junior employees, disguising it as teamwork while subtly avoiding accountability. Her fingers tapped against her notebook as she listened, the words blurring together. She thought of Mark, of his friend who changed things, and then she did something she had never done before. She raised her hand. The conversation stuttered. Heads turned, eyebrows lifted. Megan felt her pulse in her throat, but she didn't back down. "I have a question," she said, voice steady. "If this isn't part of their job descriptions, why is it being assigned to them?" Silence. One of the senior managers, a sharp-looking man with a practiced smile, tilted his head. "Excuse me?" Megan folded her hands on the table. The additional workload being given to junior employees, it's not in their contracts. If it's not their responsibility, why are they doing it? A flicker of surprise crossed his face before it settled into something more calculated. It's about team effort. That's how we function here. Megan didn't blink. So, are they getting paid for that extra work? A heavier silence this time. The senior manager's jaw tightened. "Ms. Harper, this is how corporate structure works. Sometimes we take on additional tasks for the benefit of the company." Megan tilted her head, mirroring his earlier expression. "Then shouldn't everyone be taking on extra work, not just the lowest-level employees?" The room shifted. Someone near the back coughed. Another manager glanced at Russell, who had been silent, observing. Russell didn't react, but Megan saw the slightest twitch of his lips, like he was amused. The senior manager exhaled sharply. This isn't the time or place for that discussion. Megan leaned back in her chair. Then when is? More silence. For the first time, the power in the room had shifted, and Megan had been the one to move it. The meeting ended, but the energy lingered. As Megan walked out, whispers followed her. But this time, they weren't just about her presence. They were about what she had said. Megan hadn't even made it to her desk before she knew something was wrong. The air felt different, tighter, heavier. Conversations were hushed as she passed, lingering glances flickering her way before quickly averting. The usual office murmur had a charged undercurrent, like the moment before a storm broke. She barely had time to process it before Evelyn appeared beside her. "Russell wants to see you." Megan's stomach dropped. Russell's office was vast, but never ostentatious. The walls were lined with books, not decorations, and the furniture was practical, not extravagant. He was a man who valued function over flair, a trait Megan had come to respect in the few weeks she had worked under him. But today, the air in the office was different. Russell sat behind his desk, elbows resting lightly on the polished wood, his expression unreadable. Across from him stood David Langston, Senior VP of Operations, a man whose tailored suits were as sharp as his cutting remarks in meetings. Megan stepped inside, heart pounding. "You wanted to see me?" Langston wasted no time. "Did you really think you could get away with this?" Megan blinked. "What?" Langston tossed a folder onto the desk. It slid toward her, pages fanning out. She caught a glimpse of confidential financial reports, leaked email chains, sensitive data, all tied to her employee login credentials. Megan's mouth went dry. "This was sent to an external party," Langston said, his tone cold. "Someone leaked it, and the access log traces back to you." Her pulse roared in her ears. "That's not possible." Russell remained silent, watching. Langston crossed his arms. "It's all right there. You want to deny it?" Megan's mind raced. How? How could this be traced to her? She had barely done anything beyond learning the system, let alone accessed something like this. "I didn't do this," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Then how do you explain it?" Langston's tone sharpened. "Because, from where I'm standing, the unqualified newbie, who had no business being here in the first place, just happened to be the one responsible for a major security breach. Megan clenched her fists. I wouldn't. Russell leaned forward, finally speaking. Enough. The room stilled. He studied her, not with anger, but with calculated precision. Megan, he said, do you have any idea how this could have happened? She swallowed. No. A pause. A beat of silence, stretching just a little too long. Then Russell leaned back, exhaling through his nose. I'm not going to make a decision based on accusations alone. Langston scoffed. With all due respect, Mr. Grant, this is a major security issue. And that's why, Russell said coolly, we will investigate properly. His gaze met Megan's, unreadable. You're suspended until further notice. The words landed like a physical blow. Megan sucked in a breath. Russell. His voice was firm, but not cruel. Go home, Megan. She had no choice but to listen. Megan barely remembered the drive to Mark's house. By the time she arrived, her hands were trembling, her breath unsteady. Mark must have seen something in her face, because he didn't ask questions. He simply wheeled himself forward and took her hand. For a long moment, Megan didn't speak. Then, finally, in a voice thick with everything she had tried to hold back, she whispered, I think I just lost everything. Mark didn't flinch. He squeezed her hand. You've got to prove them wrong. The simplicity of the words made something in Megan snap back into place. She wiped at her eyes, nodding. Yeah, she couldn't let this stand. She wouldn't. Megan had no company access, but she still had her instincts. She started digging. Using old notes, she cross-referenced who had access to the same documents she had been accused of leaking. She went through archived email chains, tracking inconsistencies. And then she found it. A single, seemingly harmless access log, one that belonged to David Langston. But the timestamp. It had been altered. His login time overlapped with hers. Someone had manipulated the data. Langston had set her up. Redemption Russell was waiting when she arrived at his office. She didn't ask for permission to enter. She placed the files directly in front of him. It wasn't me, she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. It was Langston. Russell's expression remained unreadable, but she knew he was processing every detail she had just handed him. Then, without a word, he picked up the phone. The aftermath. By the end of the day, David Langston was escorted out of the building. Russell never made a public announcement, but the message was clear. He knew everything. The next morning, Megan returned to work. Whispers followed her, but this time they weren't filled with judgment. They were curious, respectful, and as she stepped into Russell's office, she felt the shift before he even spoke. He studied her for a long moment before saying, Megan, I need you for something bigger. Cliffhanger. Megan blinked. Bigger than what? Russell's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. You'll see. The conference room was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that wasn't just absence of noise, but the weight of something important about to unfold. Megan sat near the middle, her fingers tapping lightly against her notebook. The past few weeks had been a storm, and yet, here she was, still standing. Russell sat at the head of the long glass table, as composed as ever. A few executives murmured amongst themselves, but one look from him silenced the room. He clasped his hands together. I've spent years building Grant Industries into what it is today, but business alone isn't enough. He paused, scanning the faces in the room before continuing. It's time we do more. A slight murmur. Megan's gaze flickered to Evelyn, who sat beside her, perfectly still. Whatever this was, it wasn't routine. Russell turned to the large screen at the front of the room. With the click of a remote, a presentation slide appeared. Grant Foundation, for disabled children. Megan's breath caught. The slide showed detailed plans, outreach programs, funding strategies, rehabilitation centers, an entire foundation dedicated to providing opportunities for disabled children and their families. "This," Russell said, leaning forward, "is what we're building." A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Megan could see the gears turning in their heads, the calculations, the cost, the risks. But Russell wasn't finished. This isn't about profit. This is about using what we have to create real, lasting impact, and I need someone who understands that. He turned his gaze directly to Megan. "You." Silence. Megan's heart skipped a beat. Russell's voice was steady, deliberate. "I want you to lead it." A stunned pause. Someone at the table cleared their throat. "Mr. Grant," one of the executives spoke cautiously. "With all due respect, Miss Harper is still relatively new. A project of this magnitude requires someone with passion." Russell interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. His gaze didn't waver. "I've made my decision." Megan's chest tightened, the weight of his words, the sheer responsibility of what he was offering. She swallowed hard. "Why me?" Russell leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Because you're not afraid to fight for the things that matter." The room was still. Megan glanced at the presentation again, the plans, the children this would impact. Mark. And suddenly, she knew. This was where she belonged. Later that evening, Megan found herself back at Russell's estate. Mark sat near the fireplace, a book resting on his lap. The moment he saw her, he grinned. "You look like someone who just got handed the biggest job of her life." Megan laughed, though it came out shaky. "You could say that." She sat beside him, exhaling slowly. "They want me to lead a new foundation. For kids like you." Mark's eyes widened. "Wait, like, really?" She nodded. Mark's face broke into pure excitement. "That's amazing." Megan let out a breathless laugh. "Yeah, but I'm terrified." Mark tilted his head. "Why? What if I mess it up? What if I can't handle it?" Mark rolled his eyes. "Megan, you literally just survived corporate betrayal, office politics, and a setup. I think you can handle this." Megan chuckled. "That's fair." Mark's grin softened. "Besides," he said, squeezing her hand, "you're the only person I'd trust to do it." Her chest tightened, because in that moment, she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Final confirmation. The next morning, Megan walked into the office with new certainty. As she stepped into the conference room, Russell was already watching. She met his gaze, squared her shoulders, and said, "I'm in," a small nod of approval. And just like that, her new path began. Russell stood, hands in his pockets, watching as Megan took her first steps towards something bigger. She didn't see him smile, but he did, because he knew this was only the beginning. The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the sky overcast, heavy with unshed grief. The world felt hushed, as if it knew what today meant. Megan stood near the front of the private gathering, her hands clasped in front of her, posture straight but weighted. The soft murmur of voices, the rustle of black coats shifting in the cool breeze. Everything was measured, respectful. No cameras, no press, just the people who mattered. The memorial hall was filled with executives, colleagues, philanthropists, and friends, all gathered beneath the towering arches, their faces reflecting the gravity of the loss. Russell Grant was gone, and yet his presence still loomed. A massive, framed portrait stood at the front. Russell, in his prime, his sharp gaze unwavering even in stillness. A man who had built empires, not just in business, but in people. Megan's fingers tightened around the program in her hands. 30 years. 30 years since she first walked into Grant Industries, uncertain of her place. Since she had stood in this very room beside him, as he announced the foundation that would change thousands of lives. Since he had looked her in the eye and said, "I need you for something bigger." She had never truly understood the weight of those words until now. She heard the cane before she saw him, a slow, steady rhythm against the polished floor, each step measured but firm. Megan turned, and there he was. Mark Grant, grown now, no longer the small, uncertain boy in a wheelchair, but a man. His posture still bore traces of the struggle he had endured, but he stood taller now, his hand gripping the cane with steady ease. Their eyes met. For a moment, they were just Megan and Mark again. Not the CEO of the Grant Foundation and its board director. Not the powerful figures others saw. Just two people who had been shaped by the same man. Mark gave her a small smile. "You still fidget when you're nervous." Megan huffed a quiet laugh. "I am not fidgeting." His gaze flickered to her hands, still gripping the program a little too tightly. She sighed. "Fine. Maybe a little." Mark's expression softened, his voice quieter now. "He would have been proud of you, you know." Megan swallowed, the words hitting something deep. "Of us." Mark nodded, glancing toward the portrait. "Yeah, of us." A beat of silence stretched between them. Then, softly, Mark added, "Do you remember the day he told you?" Megan didn't have to ask what he meant. "I remember." She smiled, though her throat felt tight. "You said I looked like someone who just got handed the biggest job of her life." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "And you did." Megan glanced down, inhaled slowly. "I still don't know if I ever lived up to it." Mark's voice was steady. "You did. You still do." She wanted to believe that. And maybe deep down, she did. The service ended quietly, with no grand speeches, just memories shared in hushed tones, a quiet reverence that felt right for the man Russell had been. As the hall emptied, Megan and Mark remained. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Instead, they walked together, past the crowd, past the old money and powerful names, past the whispers of a legacy that would last beyond all of them, through the doors of the Grant Foundation, through his legacy, through what he left for them to carry forward. And they did. On the far wall of the Foundation's main lobby, past the rows of success stories and photos of lives changed, one frame stood alone. A black and white photo, slightly aged but preserved with care. Russell Grant standing tall. A younger Megan beside him, arms crossed, mid-laugh. A young Mark in his wheelchair, grinning up at them both. The day everything had changed. The moment they had become a family. The camera lingers and fades to black. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.